Hi everyone, and welcome to Practical Inclusion on what is a kind of wet and dreary day in Geelong, which I would like to start obviously by acknowledging the traditional owners of this land, which are the Wadawurrung people, and pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are watching us live today or on the replay, either through YouTube or on Facebook or LinkedIn. I'd love to introduce my guest today, Thea O'Connor. And Thea, before we launch in and find out a bit more about you, whose lands do you come in from today?
Yeah, so I'd like to acknowledge and pay respects to the Gumbunya people on whose land I'm beaming to you from today. And that's in the Bellingen area on the mid-north coast of New South Wales. So paying respects to them and to their elders, past and present and emerging.
Beautiful, thank you very much. We've got a topic today to talk about that I'm just so glad we're talking about, because we hear so little about it when it comes to workplace inclusion and diversity and inclusion initiatives. And we shouldn't. We need to be having more conversations, and we need to be understanding the impact of menopause on the career progression of people, on people's ability to participate in the workforce at varying stages of their life, and how really this is a topic that, as I said, we are just not talking enough about and letting slide, I suppose. And perhaps it's because it's difficult, because it's predominantly a women's issue. I'm not sure, but we're going to kind of delve into some of that today. Thea, if you could start by telling us a little bit about your story and why this topic, why you're here to talk about this topic, what it means to you, and what type of things that you do in your inclusion work.
Yeah, so Bree, I can tell you this wasn't part of my business plan. So I'm 55 now. When I was 52, I just started to experience some of the early signs of perimenopause. That's the stage when you're just going into your time of life where your reproductive life ends. And the physical symptoms were pretty mild, a little bit of heat, but no big hot flushes. Could feel I couldn't eat as much as I used to. I used to have a ravenous appetite, and then all of a sudden, my metabolism's really slowing down. So nothing too much to worry about there, but there was some symptoms. And even though they weren't severe, I found them really disturbing, and it was all about the brain. So my short-term memory, my quick-firing neurons, which I'd loved and relied on all of my life, that really changed. So, word recall, short-term memory, and a period of just not feeling motivated like I normally do. And that was all really foreign to me. And I can distinctly remember one day to sit down to write an article, because that's what I do. And my brain literally felt like an empty sphere. And I just thought, oh dear, what are we going to do here? This isn't going to end well. And I started freaking out. And I started freaking out not for my health, but for my employability. I work for myself. I'm all there is. So I just felt like I have to be sharp on this. But as I was freaking out, I caught myself and I thought, there must be other women out there about my age holding down much more challenging jobs than me. What's their experience? And then I realised I had not heard a single thing from my mother, from my 3 older sisters. I'm the youngest of 4. They've all gone through menopause. Nothing from my older female business mentors. Nothing specifically in relation to work. And then I thought, okay, there's something up here. So I went on and did a series of 50 one-on-one confidential interviews with working women going through the transition. And I was just really gobsmacked by the themes that emerged from that. So, of course, every woman's symptoms can be really diverse. But the standout themes were a sense of isolation, that they had to keep it secret, that they were scared of speaking up for fear of being stigmatised. And I just thought, wow, it's 2019 then, and we can talk about all these other things in the workplace, including, gender, sexuality, disability. They've at least started to be talked about, and we cannot talk about this life stage that, a good 50% of humanity goes through. And I thought, it's time for change. And so that's where I started looking at what do women want, or people who are going through menopause in the workplace, what do they want, and creating some services around that. So that's how it all happened. And it's been a intriguing unpacking of what is that silence about? Where does that stigma come from?
Yeah.
For you.
This is absolutely fascinating, and I love No, I always love hearing stories, and most of the people who come on this show have some kind of lived experience that has driven them towards the inclusion work. That's quite natural. But I really love the approach you took there to actually, well, hang on, let's see what other people's experiences are, and let's interview them. What were some of the most surprising things from that research for you personally?
Yeah, well, definitely confirmed that every menopause is different.
Yeah.
You know, that was just the diversity of experience, you know, really stood out. In terms of surprising, it kind of wasn't that sadly, it wasn't that surprising. It more confirmed this horrible hunch that I had of just how women felt that don't talk about it was the safest and smartest thing to do in the workplace. So it was like there's this default position, don't talk about it. And that there was a fear that even people like myself are going to make things worse for women if we do start talking about it, because it really can bring out gendered ageism in a big way. And so some of the, and this is gross generalizations here, but I'm aware of some women, say another 10 years older than me, sometimes have more the thought, will you please be quiet? We have worked so hard to create an equal playing field for women in the workplace, and now you're asking for that advantage to be tilted towards us. You're betraying everything we've worked for. So I was really aware I was treading into tricky territory, and so I had to think long and hard before going public about it, because I had this report on women's experience, and I thought if I put that out to the media, that could just really reinforce all these negative stereotypes. So which way do I go? But for me, working in wellbeing, I know that isolation is the number one killer. It's the worst thing that you can do for anyone's health and wellbeing. I knew that for me personally, maintaining the secrecy wasn't the way to go, and I had to get out there and give it a crack.
Yeah, great. So essentially, you know, what you were talking about there is this fear of, if we bring in equity initiatives to support people going through menopause, that I guess it's that fear of the backlash and the different types of practices that might create, I'm assuming.
Yeah, and I think the key fear is that women were scared that this will be perceived as a weakness, just like in some ways the whole childbirthing and breastfeeding, that it might be seen as a weakness, and particularly for those who are at the higher levels of organisations where they work really hard to get there. They just, there's no way I could talk about this in this really male environment. That's the fear, that it'll be seen as a weakness. Yeah.
And as you say, that's very much like the experiences of people who are trying to have a baby or who fall pregnant. But also we hear that commonly around, and you'd know this in some of the other work that you do around mental illness and raising that in the workplace and the impact that can have in your career progression or opportunities.
Definitely. And I'm really grateful for all the work that has been done in mental health, because when I look at it, it's a very similar that to be taken. Number one challenge, the stigma, so that people feel okay speaking up about it, and then getting some, and when it comes to menopause, some really simple, effective workplace adjustments that can be good for the employee's wellbeing and good for the workplace. So I'm really glad that actually there are some precedents there, and I've drawn heavily on some of their practices and principles.
Yeah, great. And so maybe just to backtrack a little bit for those men who are watching, or women or people of other genders who haven't experienced menopause before, you touched on some of the certainly the experience that you had. What are some of the other things that are symptoms or experiences that are getting in people's way and perhaps creating some barriers in the workplace?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, because it's really focused on the workplace. So I'll just focus on some of the studies that have asked women at work, of all the symptoms you can experience, which ones seem to be the most, present the biggest problem when it comes to your work. And the top 5, number 1 is actually fatigue, which can be a knock-on effect of, say, the insomnia or the anxiety, or even when you are sleeping well, and I could relate to this, and your stress levels aren't that high, there just seems to be this added level of tiredness. So fatigue, then the hot flushes, challenges with focus and concentration. Then there's anxiety, worry, and then the 5th one's insomnia. So that came from a study in the UK of 4,000 women. And then when I've done a much smaller survey here in an Australian workplace, exactly those top 5 came out. Now, the thing about those top 5 is that if you take out the hot flushes, all of the others are really common challenges for just about every employee. Who's not tired, who's not distracted, who, insomnia affects 1 in 3, mental health 1 in 5. So that's really good because it helps to address that concern of women themselves will say we don't want kind of special treatment or to stand out. It's like if you create a menopause-friendly workplace, it's actually going to be good for a lot of your employees, not just a group. Yeah.
Yeah, which is obviously what we see so commonly with inclusion initiatives, that I think we need to get that message out more and more, that if we do something that assists a particular group of people in the workplace, usually that has significant flow-on effects to other people in the workplace. And I think that's also true for making sure when we create our inclusion initiatives that we don't just focus on one particular demographic. And we broaden our lens to understand that people are intersectional and that there's a whole range of different types of identities or lived experience that people may have that could benefit from this equity initiative that you're bringing in, and thinking at the start how you make that more broadly applicable. I really like that. That's the same as you say for if you are creating a menopause friendly workplace. So do you have some examples of some organisations that are actually doing really well in this space, and what types of things they're doing?
Yeah, sure. And to answer that, I firstly really want to acknowledge some great people in the UK who have been wonderful mentors to me, because they're really leading the world in this space. So I'd like to jump online and check out Hen Picked and Deborah Garlick there. She's been running the workplace training now for about 4 or 5 years. And also Professor Joe Willis did a really important government report for the UK that helped kind of put this issue on the map. So I've definitely been learning from them. But here in Australia, I'm very proud of Queensland Teachers Union, because they've, at my encouragement, but they've taken on really piloting, we're calling it a pilot because this hasn't been done much before, adopting an organisational approach to becoming menopause friendly. And for me, that sits well with my training in workplace health promotion and what's best practice. You don't just focus on the individual. You have to look at the culture, you have to look at the work factors that can impact menopause, not just tell the individual to cope with these strategies. So I've been working with them for over a year now. We did have a bit of interruption from COVID, as you can imagine, which knocked menopause off the agenda for a while, like it did on many workplaces. But a really thorough process of, an anonymous staff survey right up front, so everyone could say what they thought. Is this a good idea or not? Do you want it? Setting up a steering committee, briefing the senior executives so they kind of get the business case and how it fits with their agenda. Doing a policy review to look at where can we embed menopause, for example, as a reason to request flexible work practices. We've also they wanted to create a specific menopause policy, which some organisations don't want to, but they kind of thought that would really help the culture shift and help, lead in this space. And then training for managers. So that's all of their managers being put through training. So that's to equip them to have a comfortable conversation and also explore the reasonable adjustments that can be made. And then education for all staff, all ages, all genders, so everyone knows why are we doing this. And then more specific practical workshops for the people who are experiencing menopause and could do with some strategies. So we're about 2/3 way through that pilot, and we're doing a baseline survey and an end survey. So it's just been a delight to work with them and do everything that I think we should be doing. And then they're also so far about 120 managers, 150 managers have gone through my menopause training, and they're then adopting varying degrees of support in their workplaces. And it's very early days, but I'm really glad to finally have some case studies that I can point to. Yeah, because 2 years ago, Bree, I did a webinar on menopause for ARI, the Australian Human Resources Institute.
Yep.
And 5 people signed up from their tens of thousands of people. So that was 2 years ago, and I've really noticed the shift in just the last 6 months. Awareness and interest and receptivity, a tipping point. That's what I'm noticing. I think is about.
Is what? Sorry, I think you just cut out. Then what was the tipping point?
A tipping point. I feel like is happening about now.
Yep. Yeah. I wonder what that is that's driving that. I know there's been a lot of focus, a lot more focus on age when it comes to diversity and inclusion work. So there's a lot of a bigger push around understanding the different experiences of the different age groups in your organisation. Do you think maybe that's what's driving this, or is it more around just people having the conversation more and starting to raise these issues?
Probably, like you said, the work around ageism is preparing the ground.
Mm.
What I found so far is the majority of workplaces that are receptive, there's a woman in there who went through menopause herself, had a terrible time, and is now really committed that the people coming after her won't have such a bad experience. So it's almost a generational thing. Perhaps, again, excuse the generalizations, perhaps the generation ahead of us, they were just trying to, find their way in the workplace. People my age now are coming through and going, hello, why aren't we talking about this and just starting to roll the cage a bit? The generation beneath me, I think, are coming through way more empowered with that sense of, yeah, of course, it's a natural life stage. Yep, you need to provide me supports. So employers do need to get ready for that.
Yeah, exactly. People are going to make more noise.
I think so. Yeah.
No, that's great. Just a call out to those watching. Please remember you can put questions or comments in the thread, and we'll happily address them as we go along. Or if not, if we don't get to them, we'll address them later. I've got another question here, and I'm interested in what are the biggest challenges you've faced? What's been, have you experienced backlash, and if so, in what form and how? And, what other types of challenges have you faced trying to get organisations to really act on this?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest challenges has been, as I mentioned before, it brings out this gendered ageism. So there is the stigma. It makes women themselves not want to talk about it. So when I interviewed women and I said, well, what is that stigma? And they would say things like, well, there's this unconscious bias that menopause means you're past your career peak. You're not as sharp anymore, kind of your time is done. And or you're not young and fertile and beautiful anymore. And so in a very ageist culture, you kind of lose your sense of value. And so you think, where did that stigma come from? It hasn't always been around, historically speaking. But if you look back in the 1960s, I think a few doctors and psychologists have got a bit to answer for it. I put out a quote for you, Bree. So, Sigmund Freud, famous Sigmund Freud, he said it's a well-known fact that after women have lost their genital function, the character often undergoes a peculiar alteration. He's gone down saying that. And then Robert Wilson, who was a gynecologist who wrote the best-selling book on Feminine Forever, and he was a big proponent of HRT, he said the unpalatable truth must be faced that all postmenopausal women are castrates. So it's not that long ago that this very negative, misogynistic attitudes were there, and I have a sneaking feeling that's still kind of lingering in our unconscious. So I think that's number one, stigma and all the different kinds of discrimination it triggers. I think there's another one also, it's just the very personal nature of the symptoms. Some women themselves say, and I think rightly so, I don't want to be talking about this at workplace. You know. So that's understandable. It can raise the ick factor. That's what lastly, I think the workplace has never been a very friendly place for the human body. I think so many organisations still expect this constant mechanistic output day after day, life stage after life stage. We still have that machine-like expectation of human beings. And then when it comes to the female reproductive body, with all its changes and whatever, it's always been an uncomfortable fit. And I think workplaces are still coming to terms with the fact that we employ human beings. Human beings have bodies. These bodies go through cycles. And this is one big walking turn in the life cycle. And, they talk about, we'll have to get good at dealing with change, in the workplace. So we'll employ a menopausal woman. She's dealing with unpredictability and change every day of her life. But I think a lot of our work ethic still isn't very body friendly. And that's at the heart of my work, trying to rehumanise our work ethic. So it's actually shaped around the human body, which is by nature based on rhythms and cycles. It's not that we're designed to give. That's
really insightful. That's got my brain ticking overtime. And I think we've seen some of, we perhaps have seen some organisations going through COVID becoming, maybe coming more to terms with this, that we are humans, and maybe, and I don't know if you've seen this, but the research that's showing that people have actually increased their productivity over the time that they've been working from home, to me is actually really quite interesting, because it does send that message to employers that our structure of getting people to work has not always created the most productivity. So when we think about actually, if our output, if what we're looking for is productivity, then how do we design a system that actually enables people to be at their best? And that includes looking after their body and their well-being.
Yeah.
Yes, I really like that bit. So we've got a question here from Kath. Oh, sorry, did you want to say something about that?
Just very briefly, and on that point, if you look at what helps menopausal women at work, but also just what's good for psychological well-being and productivity, they marry up: flexibility, autonomy, supportive manager. So that's what helps human beings work out their best. All of us. Yeah.
Great. We've got a question here from Kath. From your experience and research in this space, what are the risks to employees, organisations and teams if nothing is done? And also, what would the gold standard workplace look like?
Yeah, so that's always a good question to include in your business case. So starting at the top, the risk to an organisation is that they don't fulfil their legal obligation to provide a healthy, safe environment that's free of discrimination. So women are scared of speaking up about discrimination, whether that's true or not, would have to be established. But there are factors in the workplace known to make menopausal symptoms worse. So if an employer doesn't address that or doesn't make some adjustments, it could go to court. And in the UK, there have been some cases where an employee have won against their employer, was menopause related. And in each case, it was just because the workplace wasn't aware of their obligations and managers didn't really understand menopause. So that's the risk of an organisation. When it comes to the individual, if nothing is done, the status quo remains, and that is that women are pushing through in silence, don't feel able to get the supports, and then their well-being deteriorates. They're more likely to leave. We know that 1 in 4 women think of leaving during the menopause transition, and about 1 in 10 actually do. So there are things like losing really experienced staff, health of the individual going down, and also you may have less women making it to senior leadership. And all the research, if you've got gender diversity at the top, that's better financially for the organisation. So it's actually in an organisation's financial interest to help that pathway. And menopause can be a bump in the road, not for all, but for some. And, providing the workplace supports can help her get through that and then go on and really, come into her own, because that's the beauty of the postmenopausal stage. You're full of so much experience, more forthright, less people-pleasing, say what you think. It can be quite a liberating stage, yeah.
Fantastic. I really like those stats when thinking about the risk, that 1 in 4 that think of leaving during menopause, and I think you said 1 in 10 that actually do. And I was absolutely going to point us to that the initiatives that almost most organisations have now around increasing the number of women in their leadership roles. Here's a key factor that you need to be thinking about if you're really trying to push for that.
And to also be aware, it's not just the symptoms that make women think that they need to leave, it's the silence. If you're trying to hide what's going on in your body, that just adds this whole other layer of stress, and stress is going to make the symptoms worse, and then, things don't go well, from there.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And Stephanie's just said, I just love that you're normalising this. It blows my mind. It's still this strange taboo.
It is, isn't it? And because if you compare it, I like to think of menopause as reverse puberty. Puberty is when all the reproductive hormones come in. This is when they're leaving. Look at how much education we have in schools from such an early age about what's going to happen. We wouldn't dream of sending, a female into the world not knowing that one day she could bleed unexpectedly. We wouldn't do that. That'd be terrible. But at the other end of the spectrum, we've got women who don't know what's going on. They don't know what all the symptoms are. I didn't know brain fog was a symptom of menopause. I've worked in health all this time. Can't believe that. They bleed heavily, unpredictably. Women are out there having full-on lives, looking after teenage kids, parents, high careers, and they haven't been given this information about what could happen to them in their bodies. It's a disgrace. It really is.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's not, we don't have time to go into it, but let's think of the actual lack of research that has been done on this important stage of a person's life. And, the lack of really solid evidence around treatments and whatnot too. So it's like this forgotten piece, which we know has a bunch of history as to why that is the case. But it's great to be talking about
that. Yeah. And particularly I'd like to see more research into the symptoms that affect working women, which is the brain stuff. And that's only just started to be added to the lists that get put out by the medical bodies. And it's still not a real thing, but it's like the women I talk to, that's what they're really struggling with. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So just to wrap this conversation up, I just wanted to reiterate, we've used sometimes some quite binary language today, but of course, if you're looking at menopause in the workplace, please remember that it's not just women who will experience menopause. Non-binary people may also, and some trans men and trans women may also experience menopause. So please keep that in mind. Always thinking intersectionally when we're doing inclusion work. Thea, thank you so much for coming on today. I'm just going to place up a website because you've got some wonderful resources on your website that people can tap into. And if they want to get in contact with you to talk about some initiatives in their workplace, is the website the best place to go?
Yeah, and there's the contact page there, and there's some free resources that might help you start the conversation at work. And just jumping back, though, I did a bit of research for you, Bree, before today because I'm trying to get myself as well. There's a lack of research on the experience of menopause in gender diverse people. I came across a woman in the UK, Tanya Glyde, Glyde, who's got a good website on this topic. She actually did her master's thesis where she interviewed, it was just 12 LGBTQI people. And I'm just in the process of getting a copy of that report myself. But people like yourselves, others listening, might be interested to track her down as well. Yeah. Yeah,
absolutely. Fantastic.
Yeah, and I will be running another public training in July.
Okay, beautiful.
Yeah, happy to share more information.
That'd be great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And as I usually say, I will upload this to YouTube afterwards, and that'll have some captions attached to it. So if you want to share from there, feel free. Also, obviously, I'll be back next week. I kind of got my dates mixed up and put out a post saying that I was going to have Luke and Michelle come on today talking about their gender affirmation resource that they've just developed. That's going to happen next week. So please tune into that, and hope to, I look forward to reading the comments that come up as people watch the replay of this particular episode. So thank you, Thea, for coming and talking about a really important topic and something we all need to be more aware of.
Yeah, thanks so much, Bree. We appreciate it.
No worries. See you, everyone.